What I want to ask you to do is just kind of get comfortable in your chair. If you haven't gotten a chance to get settled, maybe you just walked in, keys off the lap, that kind of thing. So you're settled in, right? And then would you do this? Would you just close your eyes? Right where you are. I'm probably going to lose a few of you this way, aren't I? It's okay. It's been a week. You just lean back so you don't fall forward, okay? Everybody's got their eyes closed. And now that you've got your eyes closed, I want to ask you to try to see. I mean, really, kind of look around in there. Try to picture the intersections that you drove through on the way here. Picture the rooms of your house. And I want you to imagine that this is all you have for sight. This is it. And not just for this moment, for your entire life. Eyes are still closed. I'll tell you about a theologian I learned about. His name is John Hull. John Hull lost his sight when he was in his 40s. Happened gradually. He wrote about that experience. He said blindness felt like entering another world. It's like a world where things exist, but they lose their edges. He says you can hear people, but you can't quite place them. Even your imagination stops being visual in this place. And he said that the hardest part to the blindness that eventually overcame his sight, it wasn't the darkness. It was when the faces of the people that he loved began to fade from his memory. Imagine if this was your physical condition. And let me just take it one step further. Imagine if this was your spiritual condition. All right, you can open your eyes. Sight's a precious thing, huh? Here's what we get to do today. We're going to read about a man who was blind from birth, and how somehow he wasn't the most blind person in the story. Would you like to follow along with me? John chapter 9 is where we get to learn from today. John chapter 9. Back to the book of John one more time in this series. And I'll tell you what we're turning to is going to read a little bit like a modern day sitcom. There are a lot of overlapping conversations. There are multiple characters. Everything is going to escalate really, really quickly. But underneath all of it, this story that takes up all of John chapter 9, this story is going to do something important for us. It addresses some of the biggest questions that you and I carry about how God actually works in our lives, especially when we need a miracle. So let's just go to verse 1. The Bible says, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? Rabbi means teacher, and the disciples are always walking with Jesus, always learning from Jesus, always free to ask questions. What the disciples have, I would say, unwittingly done here is they have wandered into the sacred space of what we might call the problem of suffering. And I say that they have unwittingly wandered into it because it reads almost as if they see a case study rather than a person who's been been blind for their entire lives. Kind of reminds you, if anybody remembers the old movie Patch Adams, where a bunch of medical professionals want to gather around somebody with a malady and discuss it as if it was the chapter of a science book. Only one person in the crowd is like, hey, but what's her name, And so it feels a little bit of an impersonal kind of conversation, but they take it as an opportunity to raise a good question. And, I'll tell you, a common worldview in the world of the disciples, a common worldview of suffering is that it had a simple equation, that suffering equals somebody sinned. Kind of a simplistic way to talk about suffering, but it just seems like, hey, suffering must mean that somebody sinned. And if the disciples could explain the pain, then they could make sense of it. They could probably even judge somebody for it. That's an equation that Jesus refuses. Look at the next verse. His response is, it says, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins. This happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. For me, the number of times that the amount of time I spend in this passage just getting ready for us to be together, that is a phrase that is underlined for me now, so that the power of God could be seen in him. In short, Jesus doesn't assign blame, does he? To the man or his parents. He doesn't satisfy their curiosity. He doesn't give them a full explanation. Instead, Jesus redirects the entire conversation to be one that's actually productive. It's not A or B. It's something completely different. I told you that some really good questions are going to come to the surface today. Here's the first one. If you're writing things down, there's be three of these questions we get to answer today, and here's the first one. The first question is, how do we respond when suffering doesn't make sense? I gave you an A or a B. You didn't pick either one. How do we respond when the suffering that we encounter in our lives doesn't make sense? Here's the answer. The answer is we trust that God is still for us and he's still at work, even when we don't get an explanation. Our response to suffering is trust. He's still for us and he's still at work. Let's talk facts. Not all suffering is traceable back to human sin. We're used to that, things working that way, right? We're used to, if somebody screws up or somebody near them screws up, it's going to cause suffering. And we've said that. We've said that before. We have said, choose to sin, choose to suffer. And that is a totally reliable, totally biblical phrase that you can take to the bank. Choose to sin, choose to suffer. But that does not mean that all suffering means that somebody sinned. We have a whole Bible of examples where people suffered the natural consequences of their sin or supernaturally suffered the consequences, meaning that God made sure that there was punishment because, he's steering them. But Jesus is leading us to also understand this. If you and I spend our time, making every hardship in our lives a punishment that we need to somehow decode, we'll spend the rest of our lives blaming ourselves or blaming somebody else. Does that make sense? If every hardship in your life is a problem to decode, you'll spend the rest of your time, the rest of your life, either blaming yourself or blaming somebody else. There's a classic example of this in Scripture. It's the story of Job. Not a short book. And Job is called one of the most righteous men who's ever lived, and he suffered more greatly than anybody could imagine. And his three besties sit around for the tune of 40 chapters trying to interrogate him and get him to fess up about what he did so that they could understand why he deserved all this suffering. And this just wasn't it. It just wasn't it. It wasn't about what he deserved. And so what Jesus is teaching us is that God can have purpose in our pain without explaining every reason for it. I think that's probably important for some people who are here today. You're in a season where you've been asking why. Why or why not for a really long time? Why is this struggle? Why does this struggle have to be my struggle? Why does this have to be my addiction? Why does this have to be my lot in life? Why is this my burden? And I would want you to know, not every pain in your life is something to fully explain or fully solve this side of heaven. Sometimes it's something that God wants to enter into as is. He may not tell you why. But what he will do is he will reveal where you can join him. I would call your attention to just a few weeks ago, just a few chapters ago, John chapter 5. Do you remember when Jesus said, my Father is always at work? He says, my Father is always at work, and so I am always working too. That's the confidence that we need to have. It's trust. He's still for us, and he's always at work on something good. So, when suffering doesn't seem to make sense in our lives, I wouldn't burn more calories trying to make it make sense as much as I would very quickly. The first thing I would say is don't compound the problem by presuming that this pain is a punishment. Instead, look for what God is doing. Trust that he's for you, he's working. Look and see if you can join him there. In this story, Jesus clearly isn't done yet. He is still working. And he's also working in a way that nobody expects. That's going to lead us to the next question. So question number 2. What do I do when God doesn't move immediately? What do I do? Well, Jesus has just got done saying that this man's situation, his situation of blindness is going to be is like a stage, right? He said, well, here's a reason for his suffering. It's so that God's power can be put on display in his life. That's like an open stage that God can come visit and perform what only he can do. Here's what he says next. He says, we must carry out the tasks assigned to us by the one who has sent us. The night is coming, and then nobody can work. But while I'm here in the world, I am the light of the world. And that carries some deep thoughts that we're not going to get into. There's just a part of this that I want to grab. I want to highlight the fact that he just got done saying, in his own words, quickly carry out the tasks. See that? The tasks assigned to us by the one who sent us. I just think that's noteworthy because then what happens is, it says he spit on the ground and he made mud with the saliva, and then he spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. And then he told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam, and Siloam means sent. I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about Jesus who has like instant control of everything, right? Like storms, diseases, all kinds of things. Jesus has instant command, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, did he not just use the word quickly? Like, I'm guessing that Jesus' version of quickly looks very different from my version of quickly. Because he says, let's quickly carry out the tasks. And then he's going, all right, let's have a look at you here. Applying full coverage, need a little more, taking our time, probably answering a few questions. And then finally, it's like, okay, we've got mud on his eyes. What do we do now? I'll go wash it off. Sure. And by the way, Jesus, do you know how much it takes for a blind man to just go anywhere? These are what I would call the confusing middle moments. And you and I, we've prayed this way, right? This is what we've said. Lord, if you're going to heal, if you're gonna save, if you're gonna break through, then just what? Just do it, right? Like we're wearing our Nike swag into our prayer closets. Just do it. You can. Like, why won't you? This feels like a much longer route. You remember the question that we said we were going to answer here? The question was, what do I do when God doesn't move immediately? Let me give you a good, solid answer. I take the next step of trust, even when I don't yet see the outcome. And the reason why is because sometimes Jesus chooses to work what he is working on through a process and not just an instant. The facts are, the Jesus we know, could he have healed him in an instant? Yes or no? Yes. We studied this. A few weeks ago, he healed a man's son from like towns away. You can go home now. He's healed. Not hard for him, but for God's own reasons, he chose a path to healing that involved multiple steps and way more time than we really think is necessary. And that's where some of us live right now. Like I think of a lot of you guys know my kids. My youngest, the fireball, his name is Soren, and Soren is 8. And Soren is at a point in his life where he's starting to realize that he's getting carted around for way more than he cares to be, because we got people's sports and we got things to go attend and performances and all this stuff. And just by the ratio is that most of the time, it's not about Soren. And Soren gets to sit through a sport he doesn't care for. He's got to go from thing to thing. And so Soren has started asking this question, which it's kind of funny. I don't know where it came from, but he started saying, Dad, like he's in the back of the minivan. He's like, Dad. And I'm like, yep. And he's like, are we going home now? I was like, yes. And he says, could we take the shortest possible path to the house? Like he's saying it like it's this innovative, question. So he's always like wording it. I think he's dumbing it down for his dad, but he's like, could we take, and I'm like, I don't, like, we're not like drive-through families. We're like, oh, let's go gallivant, let's go to some scenic overlook in Round Lake Beach before we go home, we're not, I've seen the price of gas. We're going straight home, but like, for something for him, I think in his mind, it's like this could be a lot faster. And so I always dignify the question. I'm like, oh, you want the shortest path, right? And he goes, yes, okay. Just so he knows I heard him. Like sometimes I'll check, did you want me to cut through some front yards? I don't know what you're asking here. But isn't this the feeling for some of us who have been taught, ask and you shall receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door shall be opened? And here I am, like, you just feel like I'm just buckled into God's van way in the back, no choices, can't reach the steering wheel. And I'm like, are you sure this is the most direct route? Or for some of us, I would say, you staying on the edge of your faith, praying what you've been praying, looking to God to be God in a very broken situation, it's almost you almost feel awkward, like kind of like a blind man walking through town with mud on his face, still blind, just thinking to himself, what am I doing? Just trusting a voice that he barely knows. Let me encourage you here. We come to Jesus, right? We are people who come to Jesus because he can heal, he can fix, he can save. And his power is matched by his wisdom. We trust him for that too. Which means not only does he offer us the power of God in our lives, but he also knows how best to put that power on display in our lives. We need him for that too. We trust him for that too. Do you remember John Hall, the guy I told you about a few minutes ago? The man who slowly lost his sight. He also wrote this, that over time, his blindness became the place where he experienced God in ways he never had before. Unprecedented intimacy with the divine, to the point where at times he even feared losing his blindness because he was afraid he would lose what blindness had given him. It's not because blindness is better. That's not what he would say. But he would say this, is that it's just because wherever God meets you, even if he meets you in a place that is not good, there is such a goodness added to that place that when God comes close, even when you're crushed, you won't want more. You won't need more. And I just wonder for some of us, if or maybe many of us, if the space that we are trying to rush through is the very space that God is wanting to put his power on display in your life, just in ways that you hadn't anticipated. Now, we will stick to the script here. We will stick to the story. Is this guy going to be healed of his blindness? He is. He is. I mean, look at verse 7. He was told to go wash the mud. Jesus' spit plus some dirt, made some mud, wash it off your face in a very specific pool. Don't even know. Maybe he walked past six pools to get to this one. Not sure. And the Bible says, so the man went and he washed and he came back seeing. Wow. And what was our covenant at the beginning of a miracle series? Never forget to say, wow. I know one's in your throat right now. Go ahead, cut loose. Wow. Wow, Jesus can do that? That's why we come to Jesus. Jesus can do that. The man hadn't seen his whole life. Now he has 20/20 vision. It's miracles upon miracles. Later, this guy's going to be walking and talking, and scientists will tell you just because you get your sight back doesn't mean your brain knows what to do with all of that. But this guy, he is fully, totally, completely healed. And this is what's even better, is that somewhere between the mud and the rinse off were this man's first steps of faith. Any step that you take, trusting what Jesus has told you, going in a new direction, I'm telling you what, that's even better. That's even better. Those are precious steps. But can you take those steps in a moment where you don't know if it's going to work or not? This is my hope for you. My hope for you is that given the choice between the immediacy of my request on my terms and the power of God put on display in your life on his terms, my prayer for you is that you will choose God's way every single time. That your desire will be loaded with trust. That's what I want to see all of our faith grow into, knowing that in any event, God is going to be faithful no matter what he chooses. God can put his power on display in our lives in a host of different ways. But he's always going to be faithful. And we're going to need that faithfulness in any and every event. Because the story will take a little bit of a turn here. Beggar man comes back from the pool. He has full eyesight, and this is what's crazy. Not everyone responds in the way that you and I would have hoped. And it gives us our final question. What do I do? What do I do when people push back on what God has done in my life? We would be going to verse 13 here, and then we would be reading all the way through pretty much the end of the chapter. That's like verses 13 through 41. It's a lot of verses, and we could, I would say that what we'll find there is instead of celebrations, there's just this whole mixed review, this cacophony of opinions, accusations, controversy. We could read that line by line, or I'll give you the choice. I could summarize it for you in a poem that I wrote myself. Okay, okay, all right. So the beggar needs a towel, but his eyes are looking great. And his neighbors are all squinting now and doing double takes. Isn't this the dude that used to sit and beg all day? Nah, it just looks like him. Guys, it's me, okay? Well, the questions are flying now. The crowd begins to press. Who did this? How'd this happen? And why is his face a mess? The man that they call Jesus, yeah, that's all I really know. And somebody returned with some of them Pharisees in tow. And the tone gets really icy as they study his new senses. This happened on the Sabbath? There should be consequences. Through whispering and shouting, they unpack the nitty-gritty. It's amazing how a miracle can't make it past committee. We're listening now, so take a bow and comment with precision. I think the guy's a prophet. Who else can give out vision? Then bring in this man's parents. Let's hear them speak to this. The healed one's for sure our son, but we'd like to plead the fifth. You'd better have the magic word to get us all agreeing. I don't know what else to tell you. I was blind, but now I'm seeing. How about I find him for you? That could help you on your search. No way, man. Here's a better plan. And they threw him out of church. There's your poem. Thank you. It's the only poem you're getting today, so I hope you liked it. Let this be a forecast of what? Not everybody will respond to God's work in your life in the same way. Some people are going to get it, and they're going to celebrate. Other people are going to question. Some people will resist. Some people will even go on the attack. And this is not a hard thing to imagine in 2026. Go to the comment section of every website that you go to, right? Nobody agrees on everything. Everybody agrees on nothing. Like it's just the way of people, and that includes the work of God in your life. We had a question on the table. What do I do when people push back on what God did, what God has done in my life? And here's the anchor. Here's the answer. I stay anchored in what Jesus has done, even when other people don't understand it. Don't you find it interesting that what was undeniable for the beggar, what was undeniable for the beggar was somehow debatable for everybody else? And I'm just saying that if you are going to be a person who welcomes the work of God in your life on very personal levels, eventually you will also know what it feels like to have your story doubted and your experience minimized and for other people to just kind of explain it away. Stay anchored in whatever is happening between you and Jesus. Stay anchored and share your story anyway. That, friends, that is where this guy shines. If you look at verse 25, you can see that he's not feeling the pressure to please everybody or to win every argument. He simply says, one thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. I mean, that's a familiar line if you've heard any worship songs over the last 100 years, right? I once was blind, but now I see. Spoken by this man simply, we never even get his name, but his story is echoing through ours. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew he had a story. And so what we ought to do is this: crave the power of God in our lives. And take steps of faith and note the changes and share your story. And listen, if some people aren't ready to come along for the ride, if they're not as passionate about it as you are, it's okay. This is what you do next. You walk it out. you live a life that shows that there's a ginormous difference between a life of spiritual blindness and a life of spiritual sight. Let them see it for themselves. This tale has a fascinating ending. And I'll take you to it. Because apparently, after all the mayhem kind of had settled, this beggar is approached by a face that he hadn't seen yet. The Bible says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man. And he asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Which I don't want you to gloss over that. When he says the Son of Man, what any good Jew in Jesus' day would have heard was the man, like the long-awaited deliverer that God had promised to send, the Messiah, like prophecy upon prophecy centered around when the Son of Man comes. He said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the man answered, "Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him." And I love this line. He says, "You have seen him. You have seen him, and he is speaking to you." "Yes, Lord, I believe," the man says, and he worshiped Jesus. Isn't that awesome? Faith. And then sight. And if it's me, I think I could have kept the story right there, but there's a little bit more. Then Jesus told him, "Hey, I entered this world to render judgment, giving sight to the blind and to show those who think they see that they are blind." And some Pharisees were standing nearby. I love that. I don't even know what the setting is, but apparently, even in Jesus' day, you have to beware what you say at one cafeteria table because there's another cafeteria table of people who are always ready for a fight, right? Some Pharisees were standing nearby, and they heard him, and they asked, "Are you saying we're blind?" And Jesus never backs down. He says, "Well, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty," Jesus replied, "but you remain guilty because you claim that you can see." And that is the end of the story. What is remarkable is that in the end, the one person who can actually see had been blind his entire life. And the people who are convinced that they see everything clearly, they are missing what is happening right in front of them. And I wonder if you have ever feared losing your sight, losing your vision. Let me give you a better fear. It's spiritual blindness. Spiritual blindness is so much worse than physical blindness because spiritual blindness will cause you to get out of step with Jesus. Spiritual blindness, it can stay that way your entire life. The Pharisees here give us a picture of what you and I do not want to be like. They have all of this knowledge, but zero recognition. They are all certainty, no surrender when it comes to Jesus. And they weren't lacking in information. They were just unwilling to accept what didn't fit their expectations. Friends, that's called vision without sight. And you know what I want for us as we're finding and following Jesus? We want to take steps in the opposite direction of all of that. And this story describes those steps pretty beautifully, I would say. I would share with you the words of the man himself. At one point in his story, he refers to him as the man they called Jesus. And then eventually, a little later, you can find where he says, he must be a prophet. And then a little later after that, he says, if this man were not from God, I'm pretty sure he is. And then finally he says, remember this? Yes, Lord, I believe. These are the steps that I feel like we're all taking from the man they called Jesus, which is, I'm glad you know his name, to He must be a prophet. That means you trust his power. If this man were not from God, now you recognize his purpose, that he was sent to come for you. But none of that will matter if you fall short of saying, yes, Lord, I believe. That it's not just about Jesus bringing a good ethic into your life, not just somebody that you think you'd probably vote for in a lineup, not just about knowing his name and liking what he's taught, not even just about, wow, he has the power of God in his hands and gives me great things. The question is he Lord? Is he so powerful? Is he so worthy that you would say, I will follow him for the rest of my life? I will give him my life because he wants to give me his. I feel like every single one of us have steps that we can take when it comes to letting Jesus be the Lord over more of what we have, more of what we feel, more of what we always wanted, more of what we prayed for. Guys, I got to tell you how small I feel when I come up and we start talking about people suffering, because I am on the prayer team that we tell you every week we'll pray for every prayer request that is written down. And I know the heavy loads that get carried into a room like this and the things that are laid at Jesus' feet. It reminds me of how the Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4 that all of us, this is the treasure we have in jars of clay, really cheap, breakable jars, is that it shows that our lives show that God's all-surpassing power in our lives, it's not from us, it's from him. That there is purpose in our pain, that God's timing is the best timing, and the best thing we can do to walk through it is to just continue to say, yes, Lord, I believe.